In this video, we're going to be continuing on with our Twitter Python API. And what we're going to be doing specifically in this video is we're going to be analyzing some tweets. Well, we're going to really set up the infrastructure first so we can take some tweets and then analyze them using pandas and numpy. So in order for us to proceed with the remaining part of this video, both of those modules need to be installed. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up a separate tab here. And if you don't already have numpy and pandas installed, then you'll need to run the following command in a terminal. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. So if you run pip install pandas, this is going to essentially give us the content that will allow us to store the tweets and the corresponding things that we extract from those tweets into something called a data frame. And this will allow us to pass this around, maybe make a graph out of it in a later video. So you'll need this in order to store the content into these data frames. The other thing that we'll need is also numpy. Numpy is just a general purpose numerical library for Python that does a lot of things. We'll only be using it for very small, 0.001% of its functionality in this video, but you're going to need it nonetheless. So I'm going to say pip install numpy. So you'll notice, by the way, that I tried to install pandas. It said I already have it, which is fine. You might see the message as well if you already have pandas installed. I'm going to see a similar message here for numpy as well. It says that I already have it installed on my machine, so I'm good to go. So I'm going to close that out, and then I'm going to go back to the file that we've been working with. And again, I will say this at the end of the video, but all of the code will be available on my GitHub. I'm just continuing on from part 2 of this series and just working from that code. So you can work along with me, or you can download the completed code once it's been uploaded with this video as well, whatever you prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and import both pandas and numpy. So I'm just going to say import numpy as np, and then also import pandas as PD. So this is just a general convention. This will allow us to refer to anything from the numpy library by just using the dot operator. So we can say np dot the name of a function that's provided from numpy. Similarly for pandas, anytime we want to access a function from pandas, we can just say, and I should say as here, as PD. So we can just say PD dot the name of a function that comes from the module pandas. And that should do it. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to add a function in this Twitter client class that's going to allow us to essentially just get directly this Twitter client API. So we can interface with this API and we can essentially extract data from the tweets that we get. So I'm going to create another function in this Twitter client class. Let's just go ahead and call it get Twitter client API. It's going to take self since it's a member of this class, and then really all I'm going to do is I'm just going to return the variable that we defined up here. So I'm just going to say return self.twitterClient, and that's it. So that's the only thing I want to add in this class. Let's go down to the bottom of the file. So at the bottom of the file we have this content from previous videos. I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of this stuff within the main portion of this file, and I'm going to create another class which is going to be responsible for analyzing the tweets that we extract from Twitter. So I'm going to call this class, let's call it tweet analyzer. So we'll say tweet analyzer, and this is just going to be a class. We'll go ahead and put in a comment here to briefly describe what this class is supposed to be doing. Let's say functionality for analyzing and categorizing content from tweets, something like that. Okay, so that's a brief description of that class. So we'll eventually go and fill this in. Let me go down to the main portion of the file here, and let's just go ahead and create a Twitter client and then use that function that we created before to allow us to get the API so we can interface with that, because that's what we're going to be using to get the tweets before we analyze them. So I'm going to say Twitter client, which is a variable. I'm going to be defining that equal to the Twitter client class. And then I'm just going to go ahead and call the function that we just created. I'm going to say API is equal to Twitter client dot get Twitter client API, which is what we called it. So now API is a variable that has the Twitter client object that we created in that class. So now what I want to do is I also want to start streaming some tweets. So let's go ahead and define a variable that we'll just call tweets. And this is going to be something that we can obtain from the client that we just created there. So I'm going to say API dot user underscore timeline. So user timeline is a function that is provided from the Twitter client API. So it's not a function that we've written. This user timeline is not a function that we've written. It's a function from the Twitter client. So just to be clear on that. So this function will allow us to specify a number of things. One thing we can specify is the user that we want to extract tweets from. And another thing that we can also specify in this function is how many tweets we want to extract from that user. So I guess just for the sake of example, let's go ahead and say that the screen name, which is how we specify the user, is equal to some Twitter user. In this case, I'm going to be using Donald Trump as an example because I guess he's, you know, someone that's well known on Twitter. So real Donald Trump is his Twitter handle. So I'm just going to use that as the variable screen name that we're passing into this function that's again given to us by the Twitter client API. And then we can also specify how many tweets we want to extract from his page by saying count, which is a variable. Again, you can consult the documentation for what the variables should be called in these functions. You can't just call screen name anything. You can't just call count anything. These are variables that are specified from the documentation that we can hard code values to, and that's what we're doing now as we call this function. So count will specify how many tweets we want to grab from, in this case, real Donald Trump. Let's just say 20. And then what we can do is let's just go ahead and just make sure this works and say print tweets. So with any luck, what this is going to do is it's going to go to the real Donald Trump, stream the most recent 20 tweets, and then we'll print that content out on the screen. So I'm just going to clear the terminal. I'm going to say Python. This is called analyzing Twitter data, which is the file that we're in, and I'm just going to write that. So we see here that we've got so I actually had to restart that because I believe I was streaming, or I was running a file from another directory with the same name, so that was my fault. So again, just going back to clearing the terminal and then running this file, which is in the directory that we're in. We run this, we get this content here, which we can see is coming from Donald Trump's Twitter page. So you can see that there's a few key indicators here from just the text. You see Donald J. Trump. So there's a couple of, basically this is just one big tweet, which has a number of features for a tweet which are specified in the JSON format, and we can extract parts of that if we want to analyze whatever part that we might be interested in. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is just kind of honing in on a few key aspects of what content we can extract from a single tweet, and then just putting that into a data frame. So we've got this tweet. We know that it works. We're streaming tweets from Donald Trump's Twitter page. And now what we can do is we can go ahead and create a data frame, which is going to store that content and just going to allow us to neatly organize that and also to process it for further data analysis later. So we're going to make use of this tweet analyzer class, which we've created up here, and also the numpy and pandas modules that we imported. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a function in this tweet analyzer class. Let's call it tweets to data frame. So it's just going to take the tweets that we've gotten here, which is just this big JSON string, and then convert it to a data frame. So in this, it'll take self, it's a member of the class, and it will also take the tweets that we want to convert to a data frame. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create the data frame object, and I'm going to say df, which is going to be the data frame, is equal to pd.dataframe. So this is a function that's provided to us from pandas. This will allow us to create a data frame based on some content that we feed it. And then what we can do is we can specify the data that we want to make the data frame out of. So we can say data is equal to, and what we're going to want to do in this is give it a list. And this list is going to be created from the tweets that we feed in to this function. So I'm going to say this is equal to the text of the tweet, which we can extract by essentially saying tweet.text for this tweet that we're going to do. I'm just going to write out the loop, and then I'm going to explain what precisely this loop does for tweet in tweets. So just to kind of unpack what's going on here, we've specified this variable that we're feeding into the data frame function, and we're creating a list, and we're looping through every single tweet in this tweets thing that we're feeding in here. And basically what we're doing is that we want to extract the text from each of those tweets. So we're creating a list where each object in that list is the text of each of the tweets. So that's what this data list is corresponding to. And then what we're going to do is we're going to specify the column for which to specify where these are going to live in the data frame. So I'm just going to give the column a name. So columns is equal to, let's say, tweets, just to specify kind of what we're storing in this column. And then I'm just going to go ahead and return the data frame that we've created here. So down here we have our tweets, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say data frame is equal to well, I guess before we do that, we need to create a tweet analyzer object for the class that we've created. So let's call it tweet analyzer. Let's have this be equal to the tweet analyzer class. So we're creating an object of this class. And then we can go ahead and say, now that we've specified that, data frame is equal to tweet analyzer dot tweets to data frame. And then we'll feed in the tweets that we've got from this line up here. So we've gotten our tweets from using the client API, and then what we're doing here is we're creating a data frame object, which again is being returned from this function, and then we're setting that equal to what this function is doing, which is essentially taking the tweets that we've gotten, converting that into a data frame, and then storing that data frame in df here. So just to see what we've got, we can go ahead and say print df.head, and this is just going to print out the first couple elements, in this case the first 10 elements of the data frame that we've created. So I'm going to write that, I'm going to clear the terminal, and then I'm going to say Python analyzing Twitter data. If we do this, we get very nicely formatted information here. So each of these are the first 10 objects of this data frame that we've created, and then you can see the tweet text of each of these is stored under this heading tweets. So that's kind of cool. So we can also extract other pieces of information from each of the tweets. So let's actually just, I'm going to comment this out for now. And what we can do is we can figure out what other attributes of these tweets we can actually extract data from. So if I say print dir of tweets of 0, what I'm essentially doing is I'm printing out essentially the information that we can extract from just the first tweet. So this is going to show us what types of pieces of information we can extract from every tweet. I'm just confining my space to just looking at the first tweet and seeing what objects we can extract from this tweet happen to be. So I'm going to go ahead and write that and run this thing. So if we run this, we see it's essentially a list of all of the possible things that we can ask of this tweet. We can ask the user, we can ask the text, which we saw, we can ask how many retweets there are, we can ask how many likes there are, favorite count, so we can ask where this tweet actually came from, the ID, a whole bunch of things. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to figure out how to extract this information from each individual tweet, put that information into our data frame, and then kind of build on this. So not only do we have the text for each of the tweets, but we've also got maybe the ID, the like count, things like that. So that's what we want to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out. That's just supposed to kind of illustrate what things we can extract. So now what we can do is we can also kind of be a little bit more granular. I guess for another sake of example, let me print out tweets of 0.id. So the way that we access, let's say, the ID of tweet 0 in this list that we've extracted, we can just use the .id method here to allow us to extract what the ID of that particular tweet is. So I'm going to write that, run this here, and we see that if we run this, this is the ID that corresponds to the tweet that we've gotten there. We can also say, let's just say retweet count, which is another one of the things that we can ask about this tweet. If we run that, we can get how many, let's see, so maybe it's not spelled correctly here. Let me just make sure that I spell that. Try that again. So this is going to give us how many times this particular tweet 0 on that list was retweeted. It's a total of 5,394 times. So that's just some information about how we can extract this content, and there's of course many different possibilities for the type of directions that you go with this information. So let's just go back up to our function here and then kind of build on this data frame to allow us to continually add to it so we can kind of get all of this information in a more helpful context for us to process it. So let's go ahead and say that we want to, in addition to storing the text of the tweet, let's say that we also want to store the ID. So we can say df ID, so we're essentially creating a column in our data frame with the heading ID, and we can set this equal to something. So we're going to essentially feed it in a numpy array, which is going to be essentially a list of the content that we're after for each of the tweets. So in this case, we're interested in the ID of each of the tweets. So we're going to want to loop through every single one of the tweets in the tweets that we're given and then extract the ID from that. So I'm going to say np.array. So this is just a numpy array object that we're creating here. And this is basically what the data frame, we're creating a data frame column based on this array. And what we're converting to an array is a list. So the list that we're going to be feeding into this is similar to what we saw above. So we can say tweet.id. So that's again how we extracted the ID for a specific tweet, as we saw down here below. We wanted to extract the retweet count or the ID. We did tweet 0 or whatever ID that corresponds to in our list of tweets, dot ID, dot retweet count, dot whatever we happen to be interested in. So we're doing the ID here. So what we're doing is we want to extract that information kind of in a similar format to what we saw up here. So for tweet in tweets. So again, what we're doing is we take the tweets that we've gotten in from this function. We're looping through every single one of those in that list, and then we're saying, give me the ID of that particular tweet, store it in an array, convert that array to a numpy array, and then create a column in this data frame with the heading ID based on every single one of those, right? There's a lot going on in that one line. So now that we have that, let's just go ahead and make sure that we have the data frame update appropriately. So I'm going to uncomment this line down here that creates the data frame based on our function that we have as part of our class. And then let's just go ahead and write the thing that we had before, which was print df.head. And let's just see what the first 10 elements look like. So we'll write that, and then we'll give this a run. So if we run this, we see that not only do we have our tweets for each of the columns here, or for each of the rows here rather, we also have the ID as well. So the corresponding ID for this tweet is stored right here, corresponding ID for this tweet here, right there, so on and so forth. So basically we're just going to keep extracting some information that might be useful, and it's going to have a very similar pattern to this line. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this line a couple times, and we're going to see what other information we can extract. And again, if you want to see any of the other types of pieces of information that you can extract from a given tweet, you can just uncomment this to see what those attributes are. So we're just going to go through this and kind of show some other examples. So let's say I want to figure out what the length of a tweet is. So I want to figure out how long a given tweet is for one reason or another. So what I can do is, same format, I want to loop through all of the tweets in the tweets that we've been given in this function. But instead of the ID, I want to analyze the text, and specifically I want to analyze the length of that text, right? So I'm going through each of the tweets, and I'm saying, figure out what each of the length of the tweets are. Sorry, I keep undoing something here. Let me just put this here. Right, okay, so there. So I'm extracting the length of each of the tweets as we loop through them, and I'm storing that in this list, converting it to a numpy array, and then creating a column called len, which is going to store that information. So maybe another attribute that we care about is the date that the tweet was posted. So same sort of concept here. The way that we can extract that information, again, which we can figure out by uncommenting this line here and seeing what the attributes are. You can also consult the documentation, by the way, to see if it's not clear based on the name as to what those things correspond to. You can see what a more elaborate definition of each of those attributes in the documentation. So if you're not sure, you can consult that. So for us to get the date here, we can say created.created at. So this is going to give us the date that that particular tweet was created at. Same process there. Let's say that we also want to do the source. So this is going to allow us to determine where the tweet is coming from. Was it from an iPhone? Was it from an Android? Was it from a desktop PC? And the way that we can get that information is by saying .source. Let's say we also want to do the number of likes. So in that case, what we're going to be doing is doing the favorite count, favorite underscore count. And then let's do one more. Let's say that we also want to figure out how many retweets there were for a given tweet. So what we can do there is, instead of favorite count, as we saw down below, we can just do retweet count. So now we've got all of these new columns in our data frame that we've created here, and they're being added to the data frame that we're returning here. And then when we create the data frame object here from the tweets that we're given, we should be able to see a whole bunch of new columns that we've created from this function. Let's just go ahead and write that. I'll clear the terminal, and then let's just make sure that we see all of that information. So I'll run this here, and it looks like that worked. So we have the text of each of the tweets, the corresponding IDs, the length, so the number of characters in each of the tweets, the date on which the tweets were posted, where it's coming from. So Donald Trump likes to post from an iPhone. How many likes each of the tweets got. So this one got a particularly the most likes out of any of these most recent tweets, and then how many retweets each of these got as well. So that's just kind of a bird's eye view of the type of information that you can extract from each of these tweets. Of course, the possibilities are somewhat limitless in terms of what you can take away from that, in terms of what you can actually, what insights you can derive from that. So this is just kind of setting up the scaffolding, and we'll continue to work with the scaffolding that we're setting up here and continue to tweak at it and see what we can do. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.